So, Laura, welcome to the Unmaking. Where are we parked, and what's the significance of this place for you?
Kia ora, good morning. We're parked at the Albertown campground at the entrance to the Dean's Bank track, which is a beautiful spot just to come and sit and overlook the Clutha, which is such a big feature of our community and the landscape around here. And the Dean's Bank track, which opened maybe 15 years ago, is somewhere where I come and ride my bike all the time. And it's one of those awesome community facilities that you can come and just enjoy at no cost.
And being an historian, assuming that you understand or know a little bit about the Dean and that history, or not?
No, I don't.
Well,
Yeah.
I've found out it is
Yeah.
actually, he was a dean. I thought it was somebody called Dean was my
he was
assumption.
actually a dean.
He was a dean,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Because my assumption was that, okay,
Yeah.
this is a bike track, and so somebody called Dean used to like riding over there. But no, I did some digging, and there is actually, I think he was the dean of one of the faculties at Aotearoa University, and that used to
That's so
be his
crazy.
favourite fishing spot.
Oh, really?
Yes, yeah. So it was pre mountain biking.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an incredible facility, isn't it?
Have you visited the graveyard here? The graves?
No, I haven't.
It's just up from where we're sitting right now. It was the first Pākehā, settler graveyard, I think, in the region.
Yes.
And so there were all these old, really sad little gravestones that are just rocks that have been carved. And over the years, it sort of got abandoned. And over the years, some of them got washed away, and a bunch of them got used for little camp firestones. So they were sort of scattered around. And they I can't remember when it was, but in the 90s, a group got together and collected all the stones that were still readable and injected sort of a polymer plastic into the carvings. And they've made a monument. It's just over there. It's really sad. A lot of little kids.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You can imagine some of
Yeah.
those long, hard winters and the inversion without really knowing what the inversion was at the time.
Yeah.
It would have been grim.
Yeah. So, I don't think people realize what they're camping next to or over probably when they camp here sometimes.
So
Yeah.
you've been here for a while though now. You came, I think,
Yes.
in 1999.
Came in 99, yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is just after the big floods. What was that like, coming to a town that was in the middle of what was a sort of probably a state of emergency had been declared locally? I'm assuming. What was going on here?
It was crazy. We arrived literally the week of the flood, so the water had just receded. I think the day before we got here. So everyone was just cleaning up at the time. We wanted to work, so my partner at the time and I came looking for jobs, and he got a job in a bike shop taking apart all the bikes that had been submerged.
Oh, yes.
It was a bike shop across the street from New World, which is no longer there. But the water, I think at New World, was almost waist high. That's how deep it was. So he got this job taking apart all the bikes and greasing them up and cleaning them up for sale. So we got a bit of work out of it.
And what did you do? What was your first paid employment here?
We came here to be ski bums, and I had a job on the reception desk at the Wānaka Medical Center. Yeah, which was a very good way to meet everyone in the community.
Yes.
Yeah.
And find out their ailments and what was going on with them.
Yeah, it was good. I worked kind of the night. I worked the shifts that other people didn't want to work, so I worked a lot of nights and weekends, and that freed me up to go skiing.
And was that a sort of a shift model that you came already equipped with, knowing, hey, this is the way I want to structure my life, or was it just worked out that way and that was a bonus?
That was just a bonus. I don't think we had any idea what we were doing. I think we just rocked up and wanted to see what would happen and thought that this seemed like a really good place to live. But we didn't have any structured thoughts about career or life. We just wanted to be somewhere that was close to snow and that seemed like it was a community that had stuff going on beyond your average ski town. So one of the things I remember that informed my decision to move here was the Cinema Paradiso. So that started in the Old Town Hall with a group of people showing films on I think it was just a bed sheet, and they made homemade ice cream as part of the experience. And I guess the whole community would go along and watch movies on this bed sheet in the Old Town Hall that's gone now. And then it eventually moved to its second location, which was where the Super Liquor store is now, near the Caltex roundabout. And that had the vibe that it has now. So there was couches in the movie theater, and there was an intermission with cookies and beers and wine and that whole feeling. And I was like, man, this is really cool for a town this size. Like, this means the people who live here are interested in more than just going tramping and bagging peaks and skiing and biking.
And did that remind you of somewhere in Canada? Because at that point you'd already lived in quite a few places in Canada, right? Was this a part of a nostalgia? Oh, this is the way Canada used to be before it got spoiled, or I've looked for this sort of thing in Canada, couldn't find it?
No, not at all. It was that I grew up in cities. So I lived in cities, big cities, until I was in my late 20s. So shifting to a smaller place was actually quite confronting for me. And I needed a little touch of what I was missing by moving to somewhere small, and something like a indie funky movie theater that showed like old French films and Hal Hartley movies from the 90s and things like that. It just gave me a little touch of what I had lost by moving somewhere small.
And what were you looking to gain then in terms of what from moving somewhere small? So to take those or retain those sort of elements, but what were the things that you were really looking to replace?
Well, it goes back to how I ended up in Aotearoa. So I had finished graduate school and I was living in Toronto. And I kind of wanted to work in journalism, but there was really nothing happening. It was sort of the late 90s. There was a recession. A lot of the work was unpaid internships. It was really the era of unpaid internships, the 90s. And I couldn't afford to do that, so I was just a bit lost. And I was working for a bank on the help desk for very early EFTPOS machines. So people would call and yell at you when their machine died, usually because it was unplugged from the wall.
Switch it back on, switch it off, and switch it back on again.
It was totally that. Turn it on and off, check the plug, and they had a line of people at the counter screaming at them because they couldn't pay. So I was doing that, which was not a super good time. And I was like, where is the furthest place on earth from this bank in Toronto? And I had come to New Zealand as a child. I was still in the back of my mind, and I thought, oh, you know what? I'm out of here. I'm going to go down to New Zealand, do an off-season winter, and do some skiing, and just kind of get my head together and figure out what I'm doing with my life. And that turned out to be really great, and I actually ended up working and skiing for 10 years. And so it was more that. It was more that I wasn't specifically looking for something. I was just hoping to have a little reset, and that reset turned into my entire future. I guess as you realize when you get older that these decisions you make when you're young can really inform what comes next in your life. Yeah. And
when you think it's going to be for a relatively short period of time or what have you, and then you look back and, wow, that was 15 years ago or whenever it was. Because that was a long time between drinks, though, from when you were here as a child. That was a long time to be carrying those memories with you. What were you doing here? Was that a family holiday? Was it ski training? What were you doing back then? Because it was like 10 or 11 or something around that age?
I was 9. It was 1979. I just dated myself. Yeah, well, that's a funny story. So when I was a little kid, I was living in Vancouver with my dad, and he, through a series of circumstances involving the shittiness of the Vancouver transit system in the 70s, ended up meeting this young couple, Kiwi couple, who had missed their bus and we're standing in the rain, and through a series of events, ended up coming to stay with us for a little while. And the woman from that couple ended up sort of doing a little bit of nannying, looking after me. She used to drive our school carpool. And they were just really lovely people. I remember the first time it snowed, they flipped out because they'd never seen snow. They were from the north, and I didn't understand that there were people on Earth who had never seen snow. So they became very close, almost family to us. And they eventually moved back here. So when I was 9, we came down to visit them.
Okay.
Did a big road trip around, particularly the South Island. I clearly remember seeing the confluence of the Clutha and the Kawarau at where Cromwell is, before the Clyde Dam. It was a big tourist attraction because the one river was brown and one was blue, and they made a little stripe where they met. So I'd actually had been to this area even, and it just stuck with me. I had some sort of golden vision of New Zealand being this kind of wonderful place that just never left me. So when I was stuck in Toronto fixing the EFTPOS machines, it seemed like a good place to go.
And a long way away, and yeah.
Yeah.
And initially, Mount Hutt, Methven, is that right?
Yeah. I stayed with that family. They were living in Wellington, so I stayed with them there and decided I was going to get a job on a ski hill for the winter, and I ended up at Hutt. Yeah.
Maybe a step back. You mentioned your father. He became a judge, and I think your mother was teaching judges to write.
Yes.
So it sounds like this was perhaps if not a literary family, but a family where words were very important. What sort of role did they have in everyday family life?
Well, everyone in my family are readers, so a lot of books and a lot of reading. But also I was the only child, and it was like the latchkey era of parenting. So I was sort of by myself a lot, and I read all the time, just all the time. Yeah. I had my dad's house, the backyard, at the back of the backyard, there were some like bushes, and I actually built myself a little Robinson Crusoe hut. In the backyard, and it was like a reading nook, and I would go back there and read books.
And what sort of books were you reading? What was were the go-tos? Were these sort of the Swallows and Amazons, sort of those kind of adventure-y, kind of outdoorsy kind of things, or classics, or?
Yeah, more classics. I wasn't like an outdoor kid. I was in the middle of a big city. So I loved Margaret Atwood, who's such a foundational Canadian writer. When in my teens, I read a lot of Russian literature. I think I was quite emo, like Dostoevsky and stuff.
Make it really hard.
Yes. Yeah. I tried to read Lord of the Rings. I remember I hated it. I'm so sorry. Don't send me out of the country. When I was young, I read all the Judy Blume books, which is what young girls in North America read at the time. I got in big trouble at school when I was about 10 because I was reading. Judy Blume wrote books for like pre-teen girls, was really her thing. About blossoming adolescence and starting to like boys and all your body going through all these changes. But then she wrote an adult novel that was quite racy. I got my hands on it, and I was reading it at school, and I got it taken off me, and the principal called my dad.
And how did that go down family-wise with books? Hey, that's just literature, and it's like, of course, it's like, was this a big deal? Laura, we need to have a talk.
No, my dad said to the principal, I think you should be really impressed that a child of that age is reading something of this level. You must be doing your job well. Yeah.
No, good attitude.
Yeah.
And when did you start writing? Was that around a similar age then? Because I think you had poems published already as a child, right?
I had the first thing I got published was like a little cartoon, a little drawing. It was like of a mushroom with an umbrella, and it had a little caption that said "Summer in Vancouver." Like, I remember that so clearly. It was in, like, the local newspaper or something. And then, all in high school, I wrote poetry. I got some poetry published in, like, I don't know, youth poetry collections. And from a very early age, I knew I wanted to be a writer. Like, that's what I always wanted to be.
What was the drive behind that? What was the appeal?
I think your way of being present in the world, of sharing something of yourself with other people. Like, there's a community in writing, and I know when I read, I felt this communion with the writer. When you read, like, it's like you're having a conversation with the person who wrote what you're reading, and I think I wanted to do that from the other side. I wanted to communicate with the world that way. I don't know.
And was that something that you figured out for yourself in terms of, hey, this is the process of writing and reading, and or with this, from courses that you'd done or things that you'd read that you sort of made the connection?
It was totally from reading. It was I just read voraciously, and it's what I wanted to do. Like, I just knew that. I read a lot of Hemingway. He's such a jerk. Like, so complicated. I don't know. So many of the writers and artists you love are obviously turn out to be really problematic, and that's such a long conversation. But, he wrote a lot about writing, and about his life as a writer and a journalist. And so I think that had a big impact on me from a young age. So writers like that who wrote about what they did and their experiences as writers and journalists, and wrote about the actual act of writing and the craft of writing, how they did it, how they thought about it, what it meant to them, and that just embedded itself in me from a really young age for whatever reason.
As a kind of aspirational lifestyle, the sort of mission, the difficulty, the challenge of, because I think I know what you mean in terms of thinking about his writing, or someone like Steinbeck or Kerouac. And who was the poet?
Allen Ginsberg?
No, the one that's very crazy and extremely drunken. I've forgotten his name, but those sort of the wild lifestyle of. Yeah.
Oh, Bukowski.
Charles Bukowski, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you're young, you have a cartoonish understanding of all that.
Yeah.
But, for whatever reason, I guess there's an immortality in it as well. You kind of make a mark that you leave behind that is attractive. Interestingly, and it was, I guess, the time in history, they're all men. There were very few female writers, really, who I was interested in particularly when I got a little bit older. Atwood is probably the main one.
Were you aware of that at the time, in terms of consciously that, hey, look, these are all men, or just like that was just the way it was, and those are the people that you aspired to be like?
It didn't cross my mind, and I didn't think in a gendered way, I don't think, until I got older and realized that how much gender does impact your space in the world and opportunity and how people view you. At the time, I just thought they were just guys, and I was just the same. Yeah. So
it's so important that if you can see it, be it, right? In terms of understanding that, and there's somebody that's just like me, including the gender, I think makes things a lot easier now for young women, young girls.
Definitely. And I go back and reread some of the stuff I loved when I was young, and I just go, oh my God, that is so awful. Yeah.
Now, how connected was that ambition to write then with your decision to study history? Was that did you see that as being a stepping stone, as something that you were to learn, or what was connected around that decision?
I mean, I actually started university as an English major, and I quickly realized that I hated it, that I wasn't interested in fiction particularly, or I wasn't interested in the study of fiction, and I didn't want to write fiction.
But you'd been reading fiction, was it a kind of a mix, or what had your reading appetite been like up until that point?
It was mostly fiction, I think probably because nonfiction was less prevalent back then. But I realized later the fiction that I really came to enjoy was fiction that was based on fact a lot more than, I wasn't interested in fantasy writing or romance writing or things like that. I was interested in historical fiction, war stories in particular, political stories, so that side of life. And I sort of realized after half a year of studying in university that I was interested more in the real world and in the social sciences. So writing in the context of reality and fact versus fantasy and made-up stories.
And so were you thinking then, okay, maybe journalism, or what was there a real sort of a career path or plan at that point?
Yeah, by then I had very much decided I wanted to be a journalist. I saw All the President's Men when I was 14 or something, and I was like, I wanted to date Robert Redford, and I also wanted to be him in that movie. It was just so exciting and so cool. I watch that film once a year still to this day.
Was that the Watergate scandal?
It's the guys. It's the guys who Woodward and Bernstein. It's the guys who broke the Watergate story, and it's Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman play them in the film. Again, the gender dynamics in that film are just I'm so sorry, anybody listening. It's very problematic, but
different place, different time.
Yeah. I love that film, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be Robert Redford. I want to take down the president. I want to smoke cigarettes in alleys with sources. Yeah.
Break stories.
Yeah.
And how did that go then? What did that look like, that path? Was it as easy to get into post studies then?
No, it was very difficult. I worked for the student press when I was in university, so I got into kind of student journalism. But when I finished school, it was there was just very little work. And yeah, it was internship based, and I just couldn't quite figure out how to do it. And that was when I was like, oh, well, I'll just take some time out and try and get my head around how this is going to work. And yeah.
Have you ever had that experience in terms of being in a newsroom, then landing up at a major daily, or because that was what it was? Was it the Washington Post? Was it?
Yeah, it was the Washington Post. No, because I ended up moving to New Zealand, and then I just kept living in small places. So I've written for papers like the Dominion Post, as it was called, or the Christchurch Press, as it was called, more in a kind of columnist kind of way, but it's always been in a freelance framework, because I haven't lived in a place that had a newsroom or a magazine publisher on site. I've worked for community newspapers. I worked for the Wānaka Sun for a few years. I worked for the Wānaka app when it launched. So I've done community journalism, but I've never lived anywhere that had a big city newsroom.
Is that something you look back and think, I missed out? It would have been great to have experienced that, or you realise now actually, what I was actually wanted to become. That was also from, when was that, the 70s, when that film was set. And those places don't exist anymore. The editors that's got the bottle of whiskey in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, and the chain smoking in all offices.
Those were the days. I don't know. You just make choices, and sometimes you end up where you didn't think you'd be. But it's worked out very well. I've had a very good life. I'm very lucky, so I don't regret that. And the whole industry has been in free fall since the late 90s. So it was, not a great time to get into that world anyways. Yeah.
And looking at it now, you writing is your vocation, your profession. You're also very clear about the times where it's like, hey, this is the breadwinner. This is bringing in so it's not so much of it's not always a creative exercise. How do you find that when you have those financial constraints or financial pressures? How do you find writing in that situation? Does that sharpen you? Does it blunt you? Does it depend?
It sharpens. I don't know what it's like for other people, but for me, anything that's sort of desperate or deadline driven comes out better. I don't work well when I don't have a time constraint or some sort of hard line that I have to meet. I think it makes me write better. But it's sort of hard. It's a tricky one. You can't make a living as a writer. So all of us who write for a living do other things as well. I don't really know anyone who is just a full-time writer and is able to live off what they earn. It's very rare now.
Do you put artificial constraints on yourself to be able to bring that sharpness around things like setting your own deadlines in a situation where perhaps there is no deadline to make sure that you deliver the way that you perhaps want to?
Nah, there's always a deadline. There's always a deadline. You've got to churn out so much. Yeah.
What about teaching? So you taught at Mount Aspiring College for 10 years, and you've also taught skiing. What are the similarities between those two? Quite different activities, but in terms of working together with young people and trying to get something out of them that maybe they don't realise is perhaps in there or that they can do.
Yeah, I mean, I retrained as a high school teacher because I had a baby and I needed a job that would pay the bills when my child was young in a small town where there's not a lot to do other than be a real estate agent that's about it actually still. Yeah. Yeah. But it certainly was a job where you felt like you could change someone's young life. You could also mess it up. But it's a job that is incredibly impactful and rewarding when you have success with a young person. And ski teaching was like that too. You know, it seems like almost a shallow pursuit, going up the mountain. You know, people think of it as a rich person's sport and, you know, you're just hanging out with a bunch of well-heeled people, wearing expensive gear and enjoying their expensive holidays. But actually, sport can change someone's life, and seeing someone have success in a way that they didn't believe was possible for themselves, whether it's in sport or in an intellectual pursuit or a creative pursuit, is really rewarding and can be really life-changing for someone. So I taught a woman I used to go back and forth between New Zealand and America, winter to winter. I taught a woman in Utah who had just recovered from I think it was cancer, a very bad episode of health. And she was terrified to get back on snow. She was really worried that she might hurt herself or that she couldn't do what she used to be able to do. And I spent a week with her every day, and we started like on the bunny slope, ginger. And after 5 days, she rode up like the easy chair and skied down, and she got to the bottom and she just wept because she felt like at that moment she'd got a little piece of her life back. And that happens. It is important. Yeah, it can be very important to an individual.
Did you have any of those experiences yourself as a child, as a young person coming through, where there was that sort of mentor or somebody that really opened your eyes to perhaps a career path or something that became then important in your life?
Well, I remember learning to ski, so that's kind of why skiing became my sport for such a long time. So I was a kid learning to ski on the local mountain. My mom and I went up together and took lessons. And they put you in a little group and they teach you how to make pizzas, and you speed up and slow down and start to make turns. And at the time, I wasn't super good at like PE class, which I think sometimes is designed to make children hate anything sporting or athletic. So I wasn't good at the rope climbing and the running and all the weird stuff we did in
Yes, all the things that you could fail at in front of your peers and
totally.
Yeah.
And we had these in Canada. We had these it was like a national sports program where you got like a badge that either was like gold, silver, bronze, or you got a participation one. And the participation meant that you showed up, but you weren't even good enough for the bronze. So I was that kid. I had the participation. So I went skiing to do ski lessons with my mom. And after like the third day, they were like dividing the kids up into the ones who still had to stay on the rope tow and practice there, and then the ones who would move on to start to learn to ski parallel. And the like ski instructor, who was probably some gorgeous 15-year-old that I was gazing at, pointed at me and said, "That kid's pretty hot. Let's put her in the next level up."
Wow, cool.
And I was like, "Oh, I can do it."
Yes. Yeah.
And like, I still remember that moment clear as day, like clear as if it was yesterday.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That validation and for that person probably didn't mean much to give that statement or to say that thing, but that impact on your life at that point.
Yeah, I was like, I can do sports. I can sport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, tell me about your poetry and cycling film Rail Lines, because I think that's sort of combining several passions, right?
Yeah, so I guess an interesting thing was I had moved down here. I was working in skiing, so I was being like a sports person. And for a while, I kind of left the writing and the creativity behind. I sort of felt like you did one thing or the other. And then... This
was your jock phase then, was it?
I was having a big jock phase. So I was sort of clinging on to a little bit of my old life, but I was, definitely focused on the sports. But then gradually I realized that I didn't want to give that other stuff up. So I started writing again. When my child was born 21 years ago, I set myself a goal that I would get a poem published by the end of the year, which I did in Otago Daily Times. I was very excited. So I really started writing creatively a lot during that time. And then I sort of started to notice that there were examples out there of people who were combining sport and creativity in like a really visceral, obvious, synergetic way. And actually there were examples of that back from the stuff I used to read when I was young. So like going back to Hemingway, he was a big skier. So he has some incredible short stories that are set around ski touring in the European Alps. So they don't need to be mutually exclusive. There's a mountain biker called Michaela Gatto, can't remember if she's Canadian or American. She's a very good downhiller, but she's also an artist. And she made these amazing films that were like animations, a combination of like film of her riding and like animated swoops and swirls following her down the mountain and tracing the landscape and things like that. So I started to really be interested in that idea of combining the two. And then the other thing I realized is when I started doing a lot of cycling is sports like cycling where you get into something called flow state, which is a term in sport that refers to the point where you're doing something that is taxing your body and challenging you mentally enough that you sort of have to pay attention. So if you imagine jogging on an uneven pathway or riding a bicycle, not down something technical, but along somewhere flat where you're having to pedal and balance, but you're not having to focus on every moment. And it's something about that allows your mind to relax and open. And a lot of creatives will say that flow state opens their mind to creation. And I find when I'm riding my bicycle, words start going through my head, and I will often write poems while I'm cycling. So I started to see this kind of crossover between my writing and my cycling. And then I started to think through, well, what could I do with that? is there some way we could present this? And I rode the rail trail, which is like a 4 or 5 day ride on an old disused rail line through central Otago, that has all these tiny towns dotted along it that all used to be rail towns. So have you been on the rail trail?
No, I've driven past it or along it, but I haven't cycled it.
It's really cool. Like for example, the houses all face what is now the bike path because it was the railroad. So like people would sit in their yard and wave at the train going by, and now they face the trail, the bike trail. And they all used to be a lot more bustling because they used to be on this busy rail line that went from Dunedin through to Cromwell. And they've got the old like bank building and the old post office. And so I was cycling on the rail trail, writing poetry in my head, stopping in these towns and looking at these cool halls. And I was like, it would be really cool to do a tour where we went and said poems in all the halls and invited the whole town along. And then I was like, yeah, and we should tow all our stuff, make it emissions free. So yeah, and then I roped a couple of my friends, Annabelle Wilson and Liz Breslin, into coming along with me on this enterprise. And then Liz had the idea that we should film it, make a documentary about it as well.
What was the lead time from that experience, from having that idea, thinking, hey, this could be a thing, then to actually then doing it?
I think it was about 2 years. Yeah. Once we had the idea, it didn't take long. It was easy to set up the tour, but we had to get a documentary crew, and then we had to try and get it funded, so apply for funding to try and get some of it paid for. Yeah.
And was that a first, that going through that sort of funding process and for a visual project like that?
I had done a lot of funding applications through various work I'd done in arts and creative space, so I knew how to do that. And both Liz and Annabelle are working writers and poets, and anyone who works in those creative spaces is really familiar with grant makers and how to apply for funding. So that was fairly straightforward.
And cycling itself, and the relationship between cycling and writing for you, how inseparable are those two things? Was cycling one of many things that you can, or that works for you in that way, or that you feel the need to write about?
It's certainly, writing is very difficult. It's something that I don't think people who haven't done it really understand, and I see it with a lot of beginning writers. There's this perception that you have an idea, you sit down, you write the first word at the start of the page or the start of your document, I guess, and you start typing, and you start at the beginning, you get to the end, and something awesome has happened. It's not like that at all. It's having ideas, it's writing random words down, it's putting something down on the page, reordering it, thinking about it for a week, looking for the exact word, trying to decide whether it's a semicolon or an em dash or a full stop. And all that process, I have learned, you have to step away from the page for a while to let it kind of do that eureka thing in your brain. And something like cycling or going for a walk, or skiing or having a cross-country ski or anything, I've found that physical activity, or even going to the gym, like I do a lot of weights, lifting weights, takes your head into a different place and opens those doorways to allow the answer to come to you. So for me, the sports side is part of the writing process for sure.
Can you meditate? Are you a meditator? Like, in terms of, like, I think that's really interesting, understanding that flow state, and that flow state for you comes from doing things that a lot of people would say, hey, that's really quite an active, high energy thing to be doing. I can't do that. To concentrate, I need to om it out and sit there and go lotus position and take out all sort of stimulus. I think
I know a lot about I don't meditate. I know a lot about it because I grew up in a kind of hippie environment. The thing, I guess, that's different between the kind of flow state I'm talking about and meditation is that meditation doesn't hold thoughts. So I think meditation is sort of a like getting the high-powered window washer in there and kind of clearing out the corners. But you know the thing with meditation where you go, oh, there's a thought, and then you just watch it pass by and leave.
I think you're supposed to do.
That's what you're supposed to do. I think that's quite hard to do.
Yeah.
I would describe flow state as more holding on. It's more that it lets those ideas come in, but you kind of hang on to them a little bit more. I mean, having said that, like if I'm writing, I always have my phone with me and I use voice notes. If I have a line in my head or I've figured out a paragraph, a problem that I'm working on with something I'm writing, and I get the answer, I'll pull over and say it into my voice notes. So that's the opposite of meditation. You're not supposed to do that when you're meditating.
You had, I think, a very positive reaction from Nathan Wethington to your book, The Bike and Beyond.
Yeah.
So I've talked to Nathan about that, obviously, and about that experience, and for him, and he said he heard your voice. And so what do you think was the voice that he heard when he read your book?
Oh, that's hard to say. I think it's just not your average voice writing about sport or the outdoors. I think a lot, not to be disparaging about that area of life and that area of writing, but a lot of writing, especially about adventure sport, I think, can be quite same. So there's a lot of like, my awesome trip, or gear reviews, or race reports and things like that. And I think when he read this book, he was like, this person might be slightly unhinged, but certainly takes views all this with kind of an unusual slant. And I think that spoke to him because he's an unusual guy as well.
And what was the slant? What is the perspective that you bring to the sport and how you reflect on it the activity that it does for you and has done for you?
I think it's a little bit of an outsider's perspective. So I didn't grow up training as an athlete. I didn't grow up in the outdoors. That book was about cycling. I didn't start cycling seriously till I was almost 30. Which is very unusual, I think, in that to have taken that sport quite seriously. I started it very late. I think I approach it with a lot of humor. There's a lot of ridiculous things that can happen on a bicycle, going fast and in mud and going to strange places. There's a lot of poignancy in looking back. I wrote a lot about when I started cycling. I started to think a lot about the bicycle and what it means in people's lives, the history of the bicycle as a form of transport, its role in feminism, how when women first started riding bicycles, people threw rocks at them. And
because it was so unladylike.
There was quite a bit of concern that the bicycle seat would cause them to become aroused and behave inappropriately.
I'm sure there was a church involved somewhere with all this.
It was all one and the same back then.
Yeah.
There was concern that they would ride out of town unchaperoned and stumble across a lad in the woods by accident, and next thing you know, be pregnant. There was concern about the clothing, so you couldn't cycle in big Victorian skirts. So women started designing these like bifurcated skirts. Mm-hmm. And, knickerbockers were from that era. So these big puffy pants that women could wear so that they could physically ride a bicycle. Because
was there a side saddle invention as well because you couldn't sit properly, possibly sit like that? And,
yeah, I mean, there's drawings of women early because women rode horses side saddle for that reason, right? So there's these drawings of women sitting on bicycles side saddle, but they could only roll; they couldn't pedal. So there's a whole history of that. That was fascinating, and it was all tied up with the right to vote. So Kate Shepherd was part of a big women's cycling club back in the day. There was a big crossover between the cyclists riding off into the moors and getting pregnant and wanting to vote, and it was all equally horrifying. So like all that, there's so many layers to this thing that we just see as a form of transport or a sport. I looked back, although I didn't do a lot of sport other than skiing in a serious way when I was young, I did ride my bicycle to school through the streets of Vancouver. There was no cycle lanes. We didn't have helmets. Like, oh my God. And being the only girl in the wee posse that rode our bikes to school, which again, at the time I didn't think anything of, but looking back on it, was maybe quite an important thing in my life. So there's all that. I looked into the idea of the narrative of sport because I'm really interested in why we watch sports. Like, why do you watch a rugby game or a baseball game? Or like the Tour de France is starting on Saturday. I'm gone for a month. I will be obsessively watching it every day. What does watching competitive sport do for us? And I think it's because it tells us a story. It's got all these elements of life in a rugby game. There's rivalries and friendships and fights, and there's tension and release, and there's different acts, and there's a narrative arc, and there's a framework of a history of the team, of the sport, of the individual players. It's all there, like wrapped up in this little game or a bicycle race or a downhill ski course. So I explored that in the book. So it was like I was really trying to come at this one topic from every angle I could think of. And I think Nathan thought, okay, yeah, we could work with this. Like, this is cool. There's a lot of material here. Yeah.
And then I think he said he told you his plan for the magazine, and you told him everything that was wrong with it, which was basically everything. And he thought, yeah, okay, this is my person. This is.
That's what he says. I don't remember clearly what that is, but I think maybe my point was, how do we differentiate what 1964 is going to be from your other outdoor magazines? Because New Zealand, there's not a lot of people here, but there are a lot of magazines, and there are a lot of magazines on one topic. So there's a bunch of women's magazines with the royals on the cover, and they seem to sell well. But there's several outdoor and sport-focused magazines, a high number for somewhere with such a small population. So my thing was like, okay, what are we going to do that's different? How are we going to differentiate ourselves from what is already out there?
And how long did it take to really articulate that around that? What is mountain culture, and this is going to be our thing, and how simple was that process, that definition process at the beginning?
It was surprisingly simple, actually. And what we did was just lean into the word culture, and because in places like Wānaka, these kind of mountain towns, there is a huge amount of adjacent creativity going on. And I've lived in places like this all over the world. So I lived in Banff, in Canada, which is where the Banff Centre for the Arts is. So it's an internationally renowned center for arts, theater, music, incubation of creativity, but set in a really stunning place where everyone around the place is running up and down mountains and running away from bears and cougars. Actually, something ate my flatmate's dog in Banff. I'm not sure what it was. It was a very small dog. I lived in Park City in Utah for a few years, which is where the Sundance Film Festival takes place. So there is something about these beautiful places where people have come to do things like skiing and then attract like high value populations because they're so beautiful. That kind of wealth of landscape also attracts creatives. Rita Angus hung out in Wānaka back in the day and did a bunch of paintings down here. There's a lot of poetry written about this area. So that is still here, and I can see it all around me. There's people making music in the community everywhere. There are a lot of artists. There's a lot of young people writing poetry, and then who are working on the lifts at Cadrona or whatever. There's always been quite an amazing open mic scene of music and spoken word. So to me, it was like, let's capture that as well as the outdoor adventure and then the rural living. So it's this combination of capturing rural South Island life, the kind of resort town, ski town life, and the creativity that runs through both of those things. Yeah.
Why do you think that is with mountain towns, that they have that sort of byproduct of attracting creative people to live there? And do you see that there's a life cycle to a town in terms of from when it's started and when it's perhaps cheap to live there, and then as it gets more expensive, and then as the perhaps less well-earning but perhaps more creative people then can no longer afford to live there, or they have to live somewhere else, or commuting, or what's the change?
Yeah, I mean, that's not just a mountain town or rural problem, that's a universal problem. So it's a problem in cities as well. So if you think of like Paris, and again, if we bring Hemingway back into it, he lived in Paris in the 20s. He actually was a journalist and wrote for the Toronto Star as a stringer, I guess, would send them stories. Like, he would send them like one story a month, and that was what he lived on in Paris with a wife and a baby. And then the baby got born, and Ernest couldn't work with the baby crying. So he had to rent a second space so he could go write in peace. And imagine that now, what it would cost to do that in Paris.
Yeah, it's true, yeah.
So where I grew up, Vancouver is the same. It's prohibitively expensive for someone with a high-paying job, much less someone who's trying to make a living as a short story writer or a poet. So you'll see like this kind of migration of artist communities from cities where they have been priced out of into cities that are kind of on the downward spiral and kind of move into abandoned warehouses and parts of town that have fallen on hard times. The artists zhuzh the place up, and then it becomes hip, and then it gets gentrified. So it's this cycle. And I guess here you'll see, like, I don't really know anyone who actually lives in Wānaka proper. We all live out in Luggett and Hawea Flat, so that was sort of the migration out of the center of town. Anyone I know who does live in Wānaka proper has been here for 30 years. What that looks like long term, I'm not sure. I mean, one thing I'd say about creatives is they're pretty tenacious. Even when times are good, we're used to making it work in all sorts of wily ways. I don't know. There's still lots of, I go back to Whistler sometimes, which is sort of like Aspen, it's outside of Vancouver. And there's still quite a strong creative community hanging on there. A lot of music and art. I don't know where they live.
Yeah, it must be hard. It's and seeing, as I said, seeing the evolution of places and phases in their development and how that changes, and seeing a place like Dunedin that has all those sort of big old empty warehouses, or Berlin a few years ago, that it was really cheap and easy to live there. It's not anymore.
Yeah.
But as a young creative, that's much more conducive to being able to produce really interesting boundary-free work than if you're really living in a really uncomfortable situation and really struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah, Oamaru has been apparently, a lot of the young people moving there, and it has that really cool old quarter. All these awesome old buildings, grain silos and warehouses and shipping storage units and things, and cheap as chips, cool environment, easy access to the water and the outdoors. Yeah. Oamaru. Maybe it's the next Berlin.
Might be.
Yeah.
I mean, talking about creativity and events, you also ran the Festival of Colour here. What was that like coming to that? Because you'd already been an enthusiastic participant and fan, and then taking on a role like that. What was that like for you? Was that your first experience of doing something like that?
It was in the creative field. So when I worked in the ski industry, I was an instructor, but I also worked in ski racing, running events. So I'd run sports events. So I knew kind of how to all the little spokes of the wheel in event management. I had some experience with, but I hadn't done it in an arts space so much before. It was an opportunity that just kind of presented itself. I had started working for them a little bit as their schools coordinator when I was still teaching. So it's a 9-day multi-genre arts festival. That's kind of the scope of something you would more see in Wellington or Auckland. It's quite an extraordinary thing to have in such a small town. So I started out running their education program, which is where artists and musicians and writers will come into all the schools, performers, puppetry, all kinds of things, and bring those opportunities to young people in the community.
Is that a standard thing in terms of like for all festivals, this is what happens? Or is this particularly important and done differently down here because it is such a small community and we don't have those sorts of people here on the everyday?
Very much. So it is standard to a point, but it's incredibly important here because that's exactly, you're right. Like young people who are interested in art and writing and music, especially classical music, but also contemporary music. If you live in Auckland, there's a million courses you can take. You can go to workshops. You can go see those performers. Like, as you said, if you see it, you can be it. Whereas here, we just don't have access to that level of artist, performer, professional. So when they come to town, we really want to make sure young people have access to those experiences and have those opportunities and like can network. So the famous one was a flautist who was at Mount Aspiring College, and she wanted to be a classical performer, I guess. And we had a small version of I don't know if it was the New Zealand Symphony or Christchurch Symphony. We can't have a whole symphony here because there's nowhere big enough, but they have a small touring version. And so we got her the opportunity to go hang out with them when they were rehearsing and watch it all happen. And she was this awesome, cool kid and started chatting with them. And long story short, she ended up with some sort of apprenticeship with the symphony. And she never would have seen classical music live without leaving town. So that was what I was doing. And then the general manager was leaving the job. And I was kind of at the point where I had enough of teaching. I can't remember what I was doing, but yeah, so I thought that would look like a really interesting, exciting thing to be a part of. Again, back to just being a real estate or nothing agent or nothing else. You know, there's not a great variety of employment opportunities in a place this size. There are more opportunities now, but this was like a few years ago. So I thought I'd give it a crack. Seemed like a good challenge. And I was very passionate about the idea of the festival, and I understood the privilege of having it here. So, yeah, seemed like an exciting challenge.
And what would you change now in terms of if you were back in that role and budget was no limitation? How would you do things differently?
I would pay everyone better. The arts, like publishing, are wildly under rewarded financially. To work in that space, you give so much. And you work so hard for not a lot. And you work long hours because you're doing everything on a shoestring and you can't afford to bring extra staff in. And that area of life is so important. And it's the old story, right? Like, there's always this tension about funding for the arts and whether the arts should be a priority for government funding and in education. And then everyone goes home and turns on the radio and listens to music. It doesn't matter what party you vote for. Everyone listens to music. Everyone goes to weddings and funerals and listens to a poem being performed. Everyone watches Netflix. But for those things to exist, underneath all that, there has to be work done that is paid to the degree that people can still live and produce that kind of work, go through the process of learning to do that kind of work, hone their skills, gain experience. And yeah, that's the thing I would do.
How much of that is a cultural thing, and how much of that is dictated by the small market size that we have here? Do you see different things in different countries, different cultures, or is this pretty universal that arts aren't really valued or appreciated?
It's universal. I can't speak. I'm speaking in a Western context. It's universal now in the sense that, and again, it's a long conversation, but the effect like the internet has had on the compensating the arts financially, and whether people are willing to pay for their entertainment or reading anymore. So that difficulty is universal. Certainly, it's cliched, but Europe, Northern Europe in particular, which has they're highly taxed societies, so there's a lot more public money, but there is, I guess it's historic, arts education and the arts themselves take a more central space up in everyday life. So, you talk to young people who are educated in Germany or France or Northern Europe, and they will have a much broader arts education. So they'll learn classics, for example, or they'll do art history in high school as part of the regular curriculum. Music might be a more fundamental subject that everyone takes. So it's more part of their everyday life in a way that is actively supported, I think, than here. I think it's probably just history.
Do you think that will change in New Zealand? Do you think that's a cultural evolution, and as perhaps there is becoming a greater appreciation for an understanding of the importance of the arts? I mean, I struggle a little bit with that term. I think it has a perception problem, actually, in terms of from a pure branding perspective. I don't think it's a particularly, because it automatically just sounds elitist and highbrow, and it's immediately ballet and opera kind of thing as the perception.
I mean, I agree with you. Well, at the moment it's going in the wrong direction. And that's the current state of politics. The current coalition that is running things is not going to prioritize those areas of life for a lot of reasons. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it could be messaged more clearly. So say you're looking at it from that pure commercial point perspective or geopolitical. So we want to grow the strength of the nation in a GDP sense, in a competitive sense internationally. We want to grow innovation in the country and opportunity. Learning music and drawing and writing in particular, communicating from a young age, all those things make for a more nimble and more broadly educated and more able to operate in a variety of contexts population. And that's valuable, like even from just a dollar sense. a population that is educated narrowly is going to be less successful internationally. If I was running the show, that's what I would do. I mean,
you'd invest more in education and change the curriculum in terms of putting more of an emphasis on creativity or creative topics.
There's, like I taught for a number of years, and every 10 years there's this, our kids are falling behind. They're not good at math. They're not good at reading. We've got to put more money into the basics. They've got to learn the basics. It's really cute that they're going to learn recorder, but it's not important. And let's drop this, no more art history, languages, all this stuff that is really valuable in a completely scientific way. There's no question that a broad education from a young age is valuable, and just rote learning of maths and letters it's very limiting and small-minded.
Yeah, I'm amazed that it still goes on to the degree it is, and just thinking back, and I was at primary school when calculators were introduced, and what a breakthrough that was, and having to think, well, actually, apart from the basics and being able to do 2 times 6, that might be important, but you don't need to understand what 173 divided by 7 is, and yet we're still kind of teaching a lot of things as if there were no other tools that we could use to help us get to these things.
Yeah, and in sport, when you're training for your sport, so say you're training as a ski racer, you train gaits, you train on snow, you work on your angles and your lines, and then you go to the gym and you do core work, and then you go out for a run to work on your cardio. You cross-train, and I think it's the same with minds. Cross-training for the minds. Let's rebrand art. Rebrand the arts. It's the new CrossFit.
Yeah, no, it definitely needs some work. I mean, I sort of look at how they successfully rebranded the king hit from a king hit to a coward punch, which I thought was a fantastic concept, basically. And I think, as I said, that's one of the problems the arts has in New Zealand is the term itself, and what that conjures up for perhaps your average taxpayer, and what they associate with that, and think, oh, actually, no, I'm not comfortable with paying more tax to be able to fund those people or whatever it is that they will see as being the arts.
And I guess I think that's absolutely true. I mean, another way to look at it is, what is Taika Waititi worth to New Zealand? And he started out in a government-funded short film program that they used to fund young filmmakers to make short films and develop their craft. That's where he learned to direct Marvel movies, or Lord, she got her start like she did Smoke Free Rock West, which did just get a bunch of extra funding, actually. Thank you, National. I appreciate that. So those kind of funded incubator programs can be massively. What's Peter Jackson worth to New Zealand?
In terms of the export value as well of those things, in terms of you take away the production costs compared with things like exporting logs and dairy powder. I'd far rather be exporting stories and film and people's voices or musical ability.
Sure, forestry has been palpably damaging to the Wairapa has just had a huge amount of flooding with a bunch of forestry / blocking waterways. It's making movies doesn't cause floods.
What's the connective tissue between the stories and features that you have in a magazine, and then also from issue to issue? How much do you theme things? So I understand. I think you have this it needs to be part of that rural, the remote aesthetic, and also it needs to be original, right? In terms of how do you look at the originality then from an editorial perspective?
I mean, the dream story is one that you can't Google. If someone's written something and I'm trying to fact check it and I'm really struggling to find the facts online, that means it really hasn't been told before. I've had a few like that. Where I've literally had to go to the shelves in the library where you're not allowed to take the books out. Yep. It has all those old moldy books. I've had to go look in a couple of those to make sure, a name was spelled right or something. So there's that side of it. Nathan and I always talk about keeping our readers off balance a little bit, which is that you never know what you're going to get next. So you'll read one story, a story about the woman who drove the Glenorchy school bus for a number of years will be on one page, and then the next page will be about how in the 1940s a bunch of farmers' overalls were spontaneously combusting and no one knew why. And they thought they were possessed or something, and it turned out the maybe it was weed killer or fertilizer they were using with spray guns was getting into their trousers and then igniting.
That's one of those things that you wouldn't hear about too often.
Yeah. So that's kind of what we want to do is keep our readers guessing and therefore excited to turn the page and find out what's going to happen next because they don't know.
Do you have benchmarks internationally that you look at from a publishing perspective and go, okay, what those guys are doing, that's awesome. Or are you out on your own by now?
We're a little bit out on our own, although one magazine we both really loved that was a little bit of a model for us was one called the Smith Journal that was published out of Australia. And there's an Australian magazine called Frankie that you'll see around here that still exists and is very popular, and it's on beautiful matte paper, and I would say it's aimed at a crafty, funky Melbourne girl who's like 25 to 35 and wears cool overalls and gets into beanie knitting sometimes. So it's like a indie, crafty, girly kind of culture. Again, not to be too gendered about it, but that's and it's a beautiful magazine. I always really loved it, although it's way too girly for me. I'm like a sports girl. And they launched, again, in a gendered way, the kind of air quotes, men's version of Frankie, which was the Smith Journal. And I loved it. They had a story on like heavy metal grandmas, and it was like women in their 80s and 90s who like hang out at Iron Maiden shows and stuff, and you can imagine the photos were great. They had an article about like how to make your own homemade tattoo gun. So sort of that, I don't know how to describe it without making gross gendered generalizations.
But that's maybe the thing, right?
Yeah.
Is to be unclassifiable. Yeah. Basically, hey, this is the thing. Because I think that's also with you guys is that that mix of stories and features that you have that for some editorial teams or publications would be like, oh, they don't know who they are, or it's like so it seems to be too all over the place. Yeah. Whereas no, actually, that's the point of it.
That is the point. Like, we contain multitudes, all of us, and the things. I guess there's a human tendency to be reductive about groups of people, or about communities or areas of life, and we want to be the opposite of that. We want to show the depth of communities like this and the people who live in places like this. We want to show the crossover between creativity and activity. We want to show that activities that we think of as scientific or sporty have creative elements to them. And we want to show that creative acts there's a physicality to them sometimes.
What does so community's often bandied around when it comes to media? Yeah. How do you look at the 1964 community and looking at it then in an analog sense in terms of the opportunity for people to connect with one another? So they've found the publication that speaks to them. Have you done any sort of experimentation around that sort of thing?
Not a lot, because we don't have any resources because we're on such a shoestring. We've had a few beer and raffle nights to bring everyone together. But our main thing is offering people the opportunity to just put everything down, sit down, and slow down, and lose themselves in our world, and connect with the community that way. Get off your phone and sit down and read about the people around you and what they're doing in a deep way.
Are you happy with where the magazine's at in terms of, the amount of content, the balance, the mix of editorial and advertising, the general direction, or is this we're at a stage whatever of 6, or how do you see it?
The magazine itself, content-wise, I'm pretty happy with, and the look and feel of it. I'd love to be resourced to travel more. We don't have the resources to pay people to travel around and go out into the field and get stories in the way larger publications do, and I would love to see that one day. It would help us get into more remote communities and just see what's happening. I would love to do an epic fact collecting road trip around the South Island for 6 weeks, but we can't afford that at the moment. One thing that's interesting about our magazine is Nathan's really staunch. Our publisher, Nathan, is super staunch about how many pages of advertising we have. So he keeps it, I can't remember the number, I think it's 24 pages. Industry standard can be up to 40, so 40 pages out of 100. And he doesn't want that because he feels that it's a less enjoyable reading experience when you're interrupted by ads that often. So that's really important to him, and I'm really happy with that because it allows me, as the editor, a lot more space to breathe and have longer stories. But we always do like a multi-page visual essay. To have space to do things like that is really unusual in a modern magazine. So really happy with that. We would love more people to subscribe. That's because we're limited on our ad pages. The only way to grow the business is to have more people subscribe. We are sort of at this turning point. I always think of it as like the vinyl record thing. Again, I'm old enough that I listened to all my music on vinyl when I was young, and super big music freak is another thing. Collected vinyl records. My weekly allowance when I was a kid was like the equivalent. I was based around so that I could afford to buy like one vinyl record a month or something. And then in the 90s it was all CDs, and then Pirate Bay came along, and LimeWire, and eventually streaming and Spotify. But now vinyl's having this, and it seemed like no one would ever make a record again, but vinyl's back, and like 20-year-olds have record players, and they're collecting them and geeking out about them. And I do feel like that movement is sort of happening with print now. There's the kids, which by kids I mean people from like under 40.
The younger generation.
The younger generation. Yeah. They're having like offline nights at bars where they all sit around and read and knit. And, they're starting to understand the damage of that kind of ADHD style of media consumption, what it's doing to them and their own brains, but also they're now entering in the world where they're trying to get paid work and do what they do, and realizing that this world in which we do not pay for the content we consume has a knock-on effect, which is that no one can afford to make valuable content anymore. They're going to have nothing left to read or look at or listen to one day because no one's been paid to do it. So I'm hoping, if you're listening to this and you're under 40, buy a book, subscribe to our magazine, go to a movie in the theater.
Have you experimented with scent in your magazine in terms of smell because that's the thing. It was like when you think about print, and one of the things it has to offer over digital is you're involving other senses. and you're never going to be able to do scent in a digital context, whereas with print, whether I'm sort of getting a Douglas fir whiff, or I'm not sure what you'd say, okay, this is the scent of 1964, or a sort of a 4-day-old bit of merino underlayer.
I mean, I wouldn't infuse a scent into a piece of paper because so many people have allergies. But we certainly, the magazine is printed on quite thick paper, and it's offset print, so it's real. It's not digital. It's real ink that soaks in layers into the page, which is why if you open the magazine, it smells. It's got that smell, and I get so much feedback about that. So many people are like, "I love your magazine. I open it up and I sniff it when I first get it." And when Nathan gets, 2,000 copies and fills his shed with them, that it's almost overwhelming, that smell of ink. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's great in terms of having that, and particularly for a younger generation that perhaps has grown up more digitally, and to have the joy of the, and that's the thing, thinking back those early independent years as a sort of 20-something-year-old, and the role of magazines back then in terms of, there was no endless scroll. It was, basically you'd wait for that magazine. It was often a monthly, and that, you'd pick it up and you'd read it over the weekend or what have you, and then you'd have it lying around for other people to look at, or you might cut some things out at some point and put into some sort of mood board, or
yeah, totally, like the tactility of it. And one thing that's happened with 1964, and there's many things that have happened with this magazine that Nathan and I have never experienced before, but I have had multiple people send me images of collages they've made with our magazine, that they've cut up back issues and made art out of them. Like a dozen or something of people have sent me versions of that. And there was, in the big annual Wānaka art exhibition, there was a piece of work that was like mixed media, acrylic, and I can't remember, with cut up bits from a 1964 being exhibited on the wall. Yeah, I've never worked for a publication where that's happened before. So people are engaging with it in like a, literally physical and tactile way, which is really cool.
You've had a bunch of different roles over your life, different job titles. You're still doing some of them concurrently. What is when somebody asks you, who you are, what are you, what do you do? Is there a single answer to that?
Yeah, I say I'm a writer. Definitely.
Not a poet?
No, because I do way more than just poetry. Yeah, way more than just poetry.
And in terms of how that then might develop further into the future, is there going to become a / something or other else after that? Is that like writer-director, for example, writer-producer?
I have no idea. Everything changes so fast. There's no answer. If you'd asked me what I was going to be doing when I was 22, what I envisioned was a world that doesn't exist anymore. So I don't know what the world's going to look like in 10 years.
Did that require some changes for you, conscious changes in terms of seeing, okay, that world that you thought that was going to exist or that you thought was happening, and you realise, well, actually it's not, or I was thinking of things through the wrong lens at that time? What sort of changes has that forced within you?
I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, which is the value of a broad education. My generation, so I'm Generation X. I think I'm an X. Yeah, we lived through. We were analog, and switched to computers when we were about in our late teens, early 20s. So the first time I touched a computer, I think I was 19. And I remember the World Wide Web starting. I looked up Courtney Love's MySpace. Remember, I was very excited. So we went through this period of radical change that really impacted the workplace and the ways, particularly if you were interested in working in any kind of media, like that whole landscape changed wildly in my generation's lifetime. So we were forced to pivot generationally, I think, multiple times. So it's kind of baked into people my age anyways. Again, unless we were a real estate agent. But even that, you've got to make your little TikToks now if you're a real estate agent, and your drone shots. So going back to being kind of educated broadly and have had a broad range of experience as a young person, it gives you little backups that you can dip into. So I had done a bit of sport as a kid and done the skiing, and then when I was almost 30, I took it up as a career. And crazily, that was a really good time to do it. And I bought a house from working in skiing. I'm so sorry, anyone young listening to this now, because it's not a thing anymore. But I never thought I would buy my first house from skiing, but I did. I thought I was going to buy my first house after I won a Pulitzer Prize, but that didn't happen.
Well, it hasn't happened yet, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't qualify. I realize I don't qualify because I'm not American, but...
Yeah. And so you've retrained, and you've retrained. You've learnt new skills and things along the way, with a positive outlook and a positive frame of mind, or kind of begrudgingly because that's no longer viable. The frustration that's associated with those things.
No, I mean it's. Yeah, that's a good question. No, not begrudging. Kind of exciting and interesting. I'm not someone who would have been happy just doing the same thing my whole life. Some people are. I'm not that guy. And I really enjoy, going back to working in industries that are in free fall, so the arts and publishing. You end up having to do everything yourself, and so you're constantly having to figure stuff out. In the arts festival world, often part of the cycle, it was just me in the office. So I had to figure out all the fundraising, all the sponsorship stuff, how to run email newsletters, how to get the brochure published, tech issues. One day I'll be trying to fix some amp that's blown up, and then in the afternoon I'll be meeting with some high-value sponsor, and then I'm writing a press release at night. And you kind of learn to be a Renaissance person because you have to, because there's no one else. And it's the same in publishing. Over the years I've had to learn how to take photos, do photo editing, how to do layout design, as well as the written word, how to edit, which is very different from being a writer, how to edit other people's writing, one thing I do begrudgingly is social media. I have to do Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm not doing TikTok ever.
You've drawn the line.
I've drawn the line at TikTok. I'm not making reels.
Yeah.
I'm not a real girl.
And is there, if you had the choice, would you say, okay, I would rather just write and just be able to just write, or no, I understand those things and actually I don't mind having to do all those other things because it makes writing more pleasurable, because it's it has a different role compared to all the other activities that you're now having to do.
It's very hard to write 24/7. It's very hard. You can't write 8 hours a day. And even someone who's a successful, well-known writer will have some thing where they write for 4 hours in the morning, and then they go out into the garden, or they go for a walk, or they answer their fan mail or whatever, count their big pile of money they're sitting on. So I would always want to do something else. In my world, that something else has always had to be something paid, because the writing doesn't really pay the bills. But in my dream world, I would write and then do a little bit of sports coaching on the side. That would be my dream life.
And the writing itself, what would that process look like then in terms of, are you a morning person, nighttime? How do you write?
I work very well in the morning, and then I run out of steam in the afternoon. So if I have something tricky I'm working on, I'll do it right away first thing in the morning, and then the afternoon I'll spend doing easier jobs, bit of editing, sorting emails, admin for the magazine, things like that, or whatever other job I have at the time that takes less I can slow down the intellectual engine a bit in the afternoon.
You're writing a history of Luggett, and one of the things I think you said is that you haven't met somebody there who hasn't got an interesting story to tell. Is that partly a skill that in terms of getting people to be able to share that story that they've got? And is that something that you've developed over time, or is that something that you've always been pretty good at?
Yeah, the Luggett project was a book that the Community Association was working on, and I just helped them write it. But they had the idea to interview particularly older people in the community to get their stories down before they passed on to the next small town in the sky. And I don't know if it's a skill. I think it's an open-mindedness that people don't even have about themselves. So one thing I've learned in all the work I've done, particularly magazine work, where you're talking to and meeting different people all the time, every day. And every time you go and sit down and talk to someone, they say, "Oh, I don't know why you want to talk to me. I don't have anything interesting to say," or "I've never done anything interesting." And everyone is interesting. Everyone's life is a novel. I've never met someone who wasn't interesting in some way.
How gender related is that initial reluctance? Because that's certainly something I've had experience from in terms of podcast guests. In my experience, men are much easier to persuade that what they've got to say is going to be of interest to people, whereas women are a lot more self-critical about, "Oh, nobody will want to listen to what I've got to share." Is that something you've experienced?
More so generationally. So when we did the Luggett project, one thing in particularly, we wanted to interview women because they were sort of socialized to believe that their part in life was uninteresting and unimportant because historically the world of women was not written about.
And they were the supporting actor rather than the lead actor, and yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, you dig in a bit, and they were running the show almost without fail. Now, yeah, I don't know whether I have found that with younger people. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't noticed that with younger people. I think young women are raised in a... I don't know how to answer that without digging a big old hole. But no, I haven't found it. I have found that with older communities when people's roles in society were very much delineated by gender most of the time, and I have not found that now.
No, that's encouraging. I think that's a good sign in terms of societally that, well, okay, that's at least one positive thing that I thought progress was linear. I've since realised that it's not societal progress, and that sometimes we do things that you'd think, what, I thought we were on this, fast track to prosperity and understanding each other and working together and collaborating, and then things like Brexit and Russia invading Ukraine and these things that just really shook my world. But
yeah, I don't think progress is linear. I think progress happens and then there is pushback over and over and over again. And you see that with pushback against LGBTQ communities. Felt like we made all this progress, and now that kind of bigotry is being weaponized in a political way. You see that in misogyny online. This pushback against, the trad wife movement and the manosphere and all that. But here's an interesting thing. So when I was at university in the early 90s, I studied political and military history. I was quite often the only girl in the room. It's a great way to meet boys when I was 21.
Of a certain type, I would imagine, that
Yeah.
are studying that subject.
I was young and desperate. I didn't care about the type. And I've just started attending a book club that is run by my history professor from 1990. And it's a bunch of his ex-students getting together and reading books. I studied American history. So we just read a book about POW camps in the Civil War, American Civil War. That was our book this month. And 95% of the people on the Zoom, who are all over the world, and most of them are in their 20s, they're more recent students of his, 95% of them are female. They're women.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a big change.
Yeah, huge change. And in, like, adventure sports, so the first magazine, or an early magazine I edited was Spoke, which is a mountain bike magazine. And a couple of guys emailed me when I started and said, "Oh, good luck. It's a pretty alpha."
Because that wasn't really your world at that point, right? You were cycling, because I was surprised as well when I saw that, and I thought, I can't remember them as being pretty core in terms of like core mountain bike. So I did wonder in terms of what that world was like for you.
I mean, it was great. I was in that world quite a bit, and I knew all those guys, and there's something about a new sport, actually, that is more welcoming to outsiders, or i.e. women, that I found mountain biking a lot more welcoming than skiing, as far as being a female operating at a high level in the sport. There were less expectations and judgments about what I could do or couldn't do or where my place was. But certainly when I started doing that job, in the adventure sports press was pretty male, but now most of I always check it out who the editor is of, Red Bull magazines and a lot of these mountain bike and ski magazines, and I'd say the majority of them are women now.
That's interesting.
Being edited by women, yeah.
It's because I've certainly followed those publications, and I enjoyed Spoke in terms of the attitude that they brought, and compared to a lot of the sort of the traditional North American mountain bike mags at the time that were really quite different.
Yeah.
And I thought Spoke was much more literary in terms of the ambition and the concept, and much more artistic in terms of the contemporary creativity that was put into the layout and the photography and all that sort of stuff.
The editor before me was a woman as well, Eleanor Meacham, and she's a very, very good writer. She's written a couple of books, and I think that had a lot to do, the literary quality of the magazine had a lot to do with her. And then Caleb, who I think started it, who's a photographer, had a lot to do with, and his partner, I think, is a designer, so that sort of had a lot to do with that aesthetic, that kind of much more art magazine aesthetic.
That's right.
So that was a combination that really developed that magazine into something quite interesting. But having said that, I remember the first time, I think it was the first time I had an article published in Spoke, or it was the first time I'd written I used to write for them for a long time before I edited it. And Elle sent me a message, and she said, "Oh my God, I am so sorry about the back of the magazine." And when I got it in the mail, I turned it over, and the ad on the back was an ad for some forks, and it was this woman dressed like a waitress at Hooters, with like a skin-tight t-shirt on and like togs, and she was holding the forks kind of between her legs, and she was all oiled up, and then someone from off camera was like spraying her with a hose. It was just it was like a Bon Jovi video from 1987.
Or ISPO. I'm not sure if you've ever been to the ISPO event in Munich, but that used to be those were the action sports stands essentially for a while there. That was, so whether it was the Monster Girls or whoever it was, that was the, that sort of old car show kind of style of sex cells, and just basically, putting a hot young thing out there front of house and having that the thing to bring in the dealers. It's
I'm so distressed about the Monster Girls. I hope they're not. I don't know if they still exist. There was a big thing about, so the Tour de France had podium girls until maybe 5 years ago, and they finally Now they have a nice young woman and a nice young man on the podium together to give the whatever laurel to whoever's won the stage. And there was a race, it might have been the Round the Taupo race a few years ago, had podium girl, like these, yeah, it was not that long ago. And a whole bunch this is where the online world is good. A bunch of us just jumped on them online and we're like, nah, please don't do that.
Do you listen to music while you're working? Or at different phases of the process where, okay, no, this is music free, but no, this is where I can listen to music and I'm listening to it in a different way?
Yeah, I listen to music all the time. I'm a massive music freak. But I definitely listen to different kinds of music for different things. When I'm writing, I cannot listen to music with words. So I have to listen to like jazz or electronica or something in the background.
Because as soon as you're hearing words, you're then going to, okay, what are they saying, interpreting that. It's, yeah.
Yeah, it takes up space in the word part of my brain, I guess. But if I'm answering emails or doing kind of design work or whatever, then I can listen to something a little more rowdy and with words. When I'm doing exercise, I listen to like what I call like sporty spice music. So that's more like pop music.
Purely BPM in terms of does
No,
you need a
like,
certain energy level or
yeah, I guess so. Like I'm trying to think of what I have a mix called the Bad Feminist mix that I made on Spotify. It's got a lot of like Snoop Dogg and Avril Lavigne. Sorry, Avril, but she did have some bad feminist music back in the day. Like really pop music that does not support the sisterhood. I'll listen to a lot of that if I'm working out or running or biking or at the gym.
But clearly labelled that, yeah, this is the role that it's performing right now.
Yeah, I wouldn't listen to that. Well, I'd listen to Snoop Dogg anytime, actually. But Avril Lavigne is strictly for exercise.
What about the decision when you're naming the magazine? I think that's really punk to name a magazine with such a heavy literary ambition with a number. So I understand the significance of the date, that it was 1964 and this was the year that Aspiring National Park was formed. But how much of a debate was there around a word or words as opposed to a number?
Yeah, that did take a long time, actually, and a lot of back and forth and just brainstorming over and over and over and over again, because we really wanted to differentiate ourselves from other outdoor-focused or sport-focused publications. But we didn't want to limit ourselves too much with whatever word we chose. Like, every word we thought about seemed to have a really specific connotation.
It's like naming a child, I'm guessing, that one time I met that person that, they were such a pain in the ass, I can never call my kid that. Same, yeah, got it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then you've got and you really got to be careful with the connotations of a word or a symbol now. Like, you have to madly Google whatever it is and make sure it doesn't say something you didn't realize.
The far right using it as some sort of dog whistle or something or other.
Yeah, or a family member of mine, I won't say who it is, emailed me once, messaged me and said, is the upside down happy face something I shouldn't be using in my messages? You can look up what the upside down happy face means. So, you've got to look at all that. You've got to think of something that will look good as a logo. Anyone who's worked in branding knows that, can you put it on a hat? Can you put it on a sticker? Is it going to pop out on a bookshelf? We had a long discussion about whether to include other words on the cover. So most magazines that operate in our kind of broader space will have like teasers on the front cover about what the content is inside, Glenorchy bus driver tells all, that right. Kind of thing. So we eventually made a decision not to do that we wanted a cover that was a piece of art, and we wanted a name that was going to just sit in that piece of art without interfering with it. So it had to be something really spare. And then Nathan came up with it. I think he had a map of Mount Aspiring National Park on his wall, and he was just kind of looking at it, and it was like established in 1964, and I think the 1964 was kind of written in big font or something. And he put that to me, and we kind of sat on it for a while, and we were like, no, that's it. That's it. And we wanted to come at it sideways, like our content. We wanted it to be something that people would look at it and go, Nathan calls it the WTF. You know, he wants people to look at it and go, huh? What's that?
And do you get that question still from people that are coming at it and saying, why? So I've sort of seen that you're popular with the boomers, and the people like the idea of having something with their birth year on it. But for other people, they're trying to figure out what it is.
Yeah, we get asked a lot. Some people look it up. Yeah, it is funny. It is the year that it's the last year of the boomer. If you were born in 64, you're still a boomer. 65, you're not a boomer. You're an Xer. But again, 1964, you know, like I spent a lot of time looking up everything that had happened that year. Were there any connotations that were, you know, like I wouldn't have called it 1933. Like, you know, a lot of people go, I love your magazine, 1984.
Oh, really? Yes.
I don't know if that's good or bad, but yeah.
What's the next thing that you've got on the horizon that looks a little bit scary from a personal development perspective?
I'm not sure. I'm getting old, so starting to think about what I'm going to do so I don't have to eat cat food when I'm 75, I guess. But I don't have the answer to that at the moment.
So it's looking like cat food then, is the plan?
We're on cat food at the moment, but we're trying to work through it.
Have you changed your outlook to the concept of retirement over the course of your life?
I don't know. It's a funny thing. I was talking to my mum about this recently because she retired when she was a year younger than I am now, and she had a government job with a pension. And that's more of a North American thing. Like North America, they're not anymore, but pensions were common, not just in government jobs, but in private sector jobs. And everyone pays into, like Australia does, everyone pays into a pension program, which is a mandatory version of KiwiSaver, I guess. So particularly people of that generation, kind of, if you had a good job and stuck with it, you were sort of taken care of a little bit later in life. And we don't really have that. I've always done contract work and sort of bounced around doing this and that, and so no retirement plan baked into any of that. So I was sort of talking to her about that and saying, oh God, I might have messed it up. Like, and she said, you know, I said, you did it so well. And she said, oh God, no, you know, I was just bumping along too. You know, she said she didn't think about it, but it was just sort of the way things were and luck. You know, and she worked really hard and deserves to be having a nice time now. And I'm very happy for her. But the model's changed, and I'm not actually sure what the answer is. And, you know, I'm the age I am, it's worse for people who are younger because they don't have access to property. Like, I bought a house when I was a ski bum. Now you can't buy a house when you're a corporate lawyer.
What role does publication then play for you? Is that a sort of, if there's no pictures, it didn't happen kind of thing? So you could have written a poem, for example, before your child was born, but you know it was about getting it published. So that's quite a different thing. What's the significance of that act?
Well, I've talked about this with other writers. Like, why do we do it? Why do we care if we get published or not? And I guess that's the difference between keeping a diary, which can be a record for yourself or a form of therapy, and writing for publication, which is that you don't write just for yourself, and you are trying to put something out into the world that helps the world or says something or distills a truth that you want out there. It's incredibly rewarding when someone comes up to you and says, it goes back to like the teaching, right? Like someone comes up to you and says, oh, I read this poem you wrote and it made me think of this, and here's a story from my life that it helped me with or reminded me of or made me think differently about an issue or something that happened. So you are doing it to have some sort of impact or to leave some sort of mark. I had a massively rewarding moment with my child who's in his 20s, who is not interested in literature. He's a tech guy. And actually, he texted me from overseas one day, and it texted me a line from one of my poems that I wrote like 10 years ago, and said, I was thinking about that poem you wrote and this line. What a great line. I think I kind of get poetry now. And I was like, man, I broke through with like a young person who's not interested in that stuff. And plus I'm mum, so I'm totally not that cool.